The pendulum swung to the right, then to the left, stopped for a fraction of a second, and counted down again. I turned my gaze to the clock mechanism which lay disassembled in front of me. The tiny gears, springs, and levers, each part was part of the single organism I was about to bring back to life. My 68 years had not affected the precision of my movements. My hands remained steady and my eyesight sharp, especially when I used the special magnifying glass attached to the old tripod. My fingers gingerly picked up the tiny gear and set it in place. The workshop was located in the front of my house, a small one-story structure on a quiet Winston-Salem street. I had once worked as an insurance appraiser, but after I retired, I took up antique clock repair. It brought in some money and, more importantly, gave me an occupation that required concentration and skill. The doorbell rang. I looked up. Standing in the doorway was Mrs. Lawrence, an elderly lady who lived 3 blocks from me. "Mr. Broom, are they ready?" she asked, stepping carefully between the racks of clocks. "Almost there, Mrs. Lawrence. All that's left is to adjust the movement. They'll be ready for tonight." She smiled, showing perfectly straight teeth that were clearly not her own. "I got this clock from my grandmother. It stopped 15 years ago and no one could fix it." "It's very high quality," I remarked, returning to my work. "It's a late 19th century Swiss movement. They were made to last. Unlike modern trinkets," she sighed. "My granddaughter's husband gave me a watch for Christmas that lasted only 3 months and broke." I nodded, still working. "Come back at 6 o'clock. It'll be ready." When Mrs. Lawrence left, I went back to my work. Time flowed differently here than in the rest of the world. There was always a special atmosphere in the workshop, as the ticking of dozens of clocks merged into a soothing rhythm like the beating of a heart. Sometimes I thought I could feel time vibrating within these walls. My phone rang, breaking the familiar silence. I reluctantly set my tools aside and pulled an outdated smartphone out of my pocket. "Hunter Broom here," I said. "Dad? It's Shirley," came a familiar voice. Something clenched inside. My daughter rarely called, usually when she needed something. "Hello, Shirley. I'm calling about your birthday," she said in a businesslike tone, as if she were talking to a client. "Norman and I have decided to throw you a party. Next Saturday, 6 o'clock at night. Nothing fancy, just a family dinner." I was silent for a moment, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. Over the past few years, I'd celebrated birthdays alone or, at best, received a formal call from my daughter. The suggestion to throw a birthday party was unexpected and suspicious. "That's very nice of you," I finally replied. "Some of our friends will be there," Shirley continued. "And of course, Veronica. She's on vacation right now. Veronica is my granddaughter. I didn't see her more than once a year and I could hardly say I knew her. The last time I'd seen her was last Christmas, and she'd spent the entire evening staring at her phone, barely saying a dozen words. "I'll be there," I said. "Thanks for the invitation." "Okay." Her voice sounded like she was crossing an item off her to-do list. "I'll see you Saturday." Putting the phone down, I sat still for a while, staring at the face of the wall clock. A strange feeling settled somewhere under my ribs, a mixture of hope and anxiety. There was another knock at the door. This time it was Alvin Thatcher, my neighbor and perhaps my only friend. "Fix my lawnmower's brains," he muttered instead of greeting me, sitting down in the old-fashioned chair by my desk. "Third time it's broken down in a month. You just don't know how to handle it," I replied, returning to fixing Mrs. Lawrence's watch. Alvin was a former history teacher who had retired a few years earlier. We'd bonded over a shared love of antiques and old things, though he was interested in books, not clocks. "You're in a bad mood," he remarked as he watched me work. I told him about Shirley's call. Alvin knew about my troubled relationship with my daughter. "What do you think?" he asked when I was done. I shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe she really wanted to do something nice." Alvin chuckled. "Do you believe that?" I put the tools away and leaned back in my chair. I want to believe it. Pictures of the past came to mind. Shirley as a child, a lively, laughing girl who loved to climb into my lap when I read her stories. How proud she was when I taught her how to ride a bike. How we used to take her to the park on weekends with Catherine, my late wife. And then Catherine got sick. The cancer came on suddenly and progressed rapidly. The 3 months between the diagnosis and the funeral made our lives a nightmare. Shirley was 18 at the time, just entering college. After Catherine's death, something broke between us. I got caught up in work and grief and Shirley. Shirley became distant. She rarely came home on weekends, preferring to stay on campus. And when she did, there was tension between us. I didn't know how to talk to her about feelings, and she seemed to avoid any conversation about her mother. Then she met Norman Pym in her penultimate year, a tall, self-assured lad from a well-to-do family studying engineering. He looked down on me from their first meeting, barely concealing his contempt for the humble insurance valuer. I remember their wedding day. Shirley got married a year after graduating from college. I was given the role of an extra. Norman's parents were the center of attention, and I felt like an extra at this celebration of life. It was clear even then that Shirley was ashamed of me and her roots. As time went on, the gulf only grew wider. Shirley was making a career. She and Norman had bought a big house in an upscale neighborhood, and Veronica was born. Our meetings became less and less frequent and tense. I tried to keep in touch, but every conversation turned into small talk between strangers. "Hey, Hunter, where the hell are you?" Alvin's voice brought me back to reality. "Sorry," I was thinking. I rubbed my temples. You know, the last time Shirley invited me to a family dinner was 3 years ago, and that was only because her mother-in-law was coming, and Norman needed to make it look like a family. Alvin shook his head. "You think too much. Go drink their wine, eat their food, accept congratulations. It won't be any worse." "You're probably right," I agreed, though a worm of doubt continued to gnaw at me. "Lydia's been asking about you." Alvin changed the subject abruptly. "She said she saw you at the store last week, but you were so absorbed in your own thoughts that you didn't notice her greeting. Lydia, Alvin's daughter, worked as an editor at the local newspaper. Unlike Shirley, she maintained a warm relationship with her father and visited him often." "Tell her I apologize," I said. "I've really been going off on myself a lot lately." "She's going to stop by this weekend." Alvin stood up. "Maybe stop by for dinner. Lydia is making a lasagna that can raise the dead." I smiled. "Maybe I will." After Alvin left, I went back to work, but my thoughts kept coming back to the upcoming birthday party. Part of me hoped it was a sincere gesture, Shirley's attempt to mend the relationship. But the other part, more cynical and learned from years of disappointment, suspected she had some ulterior motive. At 6 o'clock, Lawrence came in to pick up her watch. Her delight when she heard the familiar ticking sound reminded me why I love my job. There is something deeply satisfying about bringing life back to mechanisms that were thought to be hopelessly broken. In the evening, sitting in an armchair with a cup of tea, I reflected on my life, about the clocks I had repaired over the years, about the people who have come and gone, about the way time flows, inexorably and inevitably, taking opportunities and hopes with it. My phone beeped, announcing an incoming message. I reluctantly picked it up. The message was from Shirley. "Don't forget, Saturday, 6 p.m. Formal attire encouraged. Formal wear." So it's not just a family dinner. There'll be guests, probably Norman's co-workers or Shirley's co-workers, people my daughter wants to look a certain way in front of. I put the phone away without answering. The unexpected birthday invitation, which had given me mixed feelings an hour ago, now seemed increasingly suspicious, but I decided to go. After all, it was a chance to see my granddaughter and maybe really begin to repair my relationship with my daughter. With that thought, I went to bed, trying not to think that the invitation might not have been motivated by concern, but by some other, less pleasant motive. Saturday morning was clear but cool. I woke up early out of habit. Years of work had developed an internal clock that rang at 6 in the morning, regardless of the day of the week. After lying there for a few minutes, listening to the ticking of the wall clock, I got up and headed for the kitchen. My morning ritual remained the same: coffee, peanut butter toast, and the newspaper. Although the newspaper had long since been replaced by a tablet, even in our small town, the paper press was retreating under the onslaught of digital technology. Flipping through the local news, I thought about the evening ahead, my birthday, 68 years old. When I was younger, I envisioned these years differently. I saw myself surrounded by a loving family in a house full of children's voices and laughter. But fate had its way. Catherine had left too soon. Shirley was estranged, and my granddaughter Veronica was almost a stranger to me. I set the clipboard aside and went to the bathroom. The mirror reflected a face I still hardly recognized, the wrinkles around my eyes, the gray that had long since supplanted all other colors, the posture no longer as straight as it used to be. But the eyes remained the same, gray-blue, attentive. The eyes of a watchmaker, accustomed to noticing the smallest details. After taking a shower, I started shaving. I usually did it every other day, but today was a special occasion. The blade glided gently over my skin, removing the gray stubble. The cologne I used was the same one I'd used 30 years ago, the classic scent Catherine had given me for our first anniversary. Then came the question of clothing. Shirley had mentioned formal wear, which translated to her meant a suit at the very least. I opened my closet and surveyed my meager closet. I had two suits, the black one I'd worn to the funeral and the dark blue one I'd bought a few years ago for my nephew Alvin's wedding. I chose the blue one, but when I took it out, I found that there was a small stain on the lapel that hadn't been there before. Could be moths or just the effects of long storage. I had to go to the city to buy a new one. The men's clothing store on Main Street was one of the few that still resisted the onslaught of shopping centers. The owner, Mr. Webb, had known me for years. "Hunter!" he exclaimed as I entered. "What are you doing here? The last time you bought something here? Let me guess. 3 years ago?" "Hello, George," I shook his hand. "I need a suit. Something conservative, but not funeral-ish." Mr. Webb gave me a professional look. "What's the occasion?" "A birthday party. My daughter invited me." "Oh, that's great." He rubbed his hands together. "I have a few options that might work for you." I spent the next hour trying on suits. Eventually I settled on a dark gray that, in Mr. Webb's words, didn't age me, but emphasized solidity. I wasn't sure if at my age you can still worry about whether clothes age you, but I decided to trust a professional. "You need a tie," he declared when the suit was done. "Do you have anything suitable?" I thought about the ties hanging in my closet at home. They'd all been bought years ago and were probably out of fashion. "Probably not." Mr. Webb led me to the tie rack. I wanted something special for the occasion, but not flashy. In the end, I chose a deep blue tie with a subtle pattern. It cost more than I usually spent on such things, but today I decided to make an exception. "Excellent choice," Mr. Webb approved. "Your daughter will be impressed." I doubted Shirley would even notice my tie, but I kept my mouth shut. After I paid for my purchases, I left the store and headed for the ATM. I needed to withdraw money for a gift. I thought for a long time about what to get Shirley. I had once known her tastes and preferences, but now she was almost a stranger to me. After some thought, I decided that money was the most practical option. No unnecessary sentimentality, no pretenses of intimacy that didn't exist. I withdrew $300, a sum large enough to show generosity, but not so large as to look like a desperate attempt to buy favor. At the newsstand, I bought a plain white envelope. On the way back, I stopped at a cafe for a bite to eat. Sitting at the window with a sandwich and coffee, I watched passers-by. Winston-Salem had changed over the years. Some of the old buildings had disappeared, giving way to modern structures of glass and concrete. New stores, cafes, and restaurants have sprung up. The city grew and changed, but I stayed the same, like an antique clock I was repairing. Mr. Broom? Hunter Broom? I turned around. Standing next to my table was a woman in her 30s or 40s with short brown hair and lively brown eyes. Lydia. I recognized Alvin's daughter. Have a seat, if you have time. She smiled and sat down across from me. Father said you would come to our house for dinner, but you never showed up. Sorry, had work to do. I sipped my coffee. How was the paper? Lydia was an editor at the Winston-Salem Journal and ran a popular blog about city life. The usual, she shrugged. Trying to compete with the internet, which is getting harder and harder. By the way, I saw your clock on display at the City Museum. They're impressive. A few months ago, the local museum organized an exhibition of antique clocks, and several pieces I restored were displayed there. Thank you. I felt unexpected warmth at her words. It's nice to know that someone appreciates the work. Your daughter must be very proud of you, Lydia said. I grinned. Shirley thinks my hobby is a waste of time. She'd rather I sold the house and moved into a nursing home. Lydia frowned. That's terrible. You're doing important work preserving history, bringing real works of art back to life. Not everyone understands that, I shrugged. For many people, a watch is just a device that tells the time. They don't see the beauty of the mechanism, the history behind each piece. We talked for a few more minutes. Lydia told me about her work, about a new project she was running in the newspaper, a series of articles about the city's old-timers and their memories. You should be one of my heroes, she said. I'm sure you have a story to tell. I'm afraid my life isn't as interesting as you think, I replied. But if you really need material, I'm always at your service. When Lydia left, I felt a strange mixture of feelings. It was nice that someone was interested in my work, saw value in it, and bitter to realize that this someone was not my own daughter. When I got home, I put the money in an envelope and sealed it. No card, no personal message, just a practical gift from a father with whom the emotional connection had long since been lost. I spent the rest of the day doing the usual chores, fixed the clock a customer had brought in the day before, cleared my desk, paid a few bills through online banking. I glanced at the clock from time to time, feeling the tension rise as the evening approached. At 5 o'clock, I started getting ready. I took another shower, shaved thoroughly, put on a new suit and tie. Looking at myself in the mirror, I tried to see what Shirley would see. An old man trying to look presentable but still falling short of the standards of her entourage. I took the envelope with the money and put it in the inside pocket of my jacket. Then I left the house and got into my old but well-maintained Ford. Shirley's house was on the other side of town, in an upper-middle-class neighborhood. The drive took about 20 minutes. I drove slowly, watching the scenery change outside the window. Modest houses were replaced by more imposing buildings. The streets grew wider, the trees taller and better maintained. The neighborhood where Shirley lived was lined with large houses with manicured lawns. It was home to doctors, lawyers, successful businessmen, people with whom Shirley and Norman tended to keep in touch. I always felt out of place here. Parking in front of my daughter's house, a 2-story structure with columns at the entrance and large windows, I sat in the car for a while gathering my thoughts. The lights were on in the windows and there were several cars in the driveway, so the guests had already arrived. I remembered when Shirley was a child, how she'd come to me with broken knees and I'd put Band-Aids on them, how I taught her how to ride her bike in the park, running beside her and supporting the saddle, how she showed me her first school grades, smiling proudly. Where did that girl go? At what point did she turn into a woman ashamed of her father? Maybe it was my own fault. I failed to give her what she expected. Or is it the nature of time, which inevitably changes people, sometimes beyond recognition? As I pondered this, I got out of the car and headed toward the house. The evening air was cool with the light scent of blossoming trees. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Stepping up onto the porch, I took a deep breath and pressed the bell. Voices and laughter came from inside. I pulled on my jacket, adjusted my tie, and prepared myself to face my daughter and her world, where I always felt uninvited. The door opened. On the threshold stood Shirley, dressed in an elegant black dress. Her hair, once as brown as Catherine's, was now dyed a lighter shade and arranged in an elaborate style. "Daddy," she faked a smile. "You're right on time. Happy birthday." I stepped forward awkwardly, not knowing whether to hug her or limit myself to a handshake. Shirley settled the matter by lightly touching my cheek, an imitation kiss that didn't require real intimacy. "Come on in," she stepped aside. "Everyone's already here." I entered the spacious hallway, decorated in a modern style. Lots of light, minimal furniture, abstract paintings on the walls. There were voices and clinking glasses coming from the living room. "Your present?" Shirley nodded at my inside pocket where the edge of an envelope peeked out. "Yes." I pulled it out and handed it to her. "It was nothing special." She took it without opening it and put it on the table in the hall. "Thank you," she said without enthusiasm. "Come on. I'll introduce you to the guests." As I followed my daughter into the living room, I felt my back muscles tense. The evening ahead promised to be long and challenging. There were about 15 people in the living room, Shirley and Norman's co-workers, their friends. They stood in groups with glasses of wine and cocktails, engaged in lively conversations. The conversations didn't stop when we arrived. Only a few people cast curious glances in my direction. Norman, a tall man with thinning hair and an impeccably trimmed beard, approached us, holding a glass of whiskey. "Ah, father-in-law," he held out his hand. "Glad you could make it." His handshake was firm but cold. Norman always treated me with barely concealed superiority. "I'm glad too," I said, trying to sound sincere. "Would you like a drink? Whiskey? Wine?" "Whiskey, please. No ice." While Norman went to the bar, Shirley began to introduce me to the guests. I nodded, shook hands, exchanged pleasantries, but the names and faces blended into one blurred image. None of these people were interested in getting to know me. To them, I was just Shirley's old father, a detail of the interior that politeness demanded to be noticed. "There's my favorite granddaughter," I cheered when I saw Veronica coming down the stairs. A tall, slender girl with blonde-colored hair, she was wearing a fancy dress that probably cost more than my entire closet. In her hand, she held a cell phone, the invariable accessory of today's youth. "Hi, Grandpa." She walked over and allowed herself to be hugged, though I could feel her body tense from the contact. "Happy birthday." "Thank you, darling." I pulled back, looking her over. "You've grown so much. How's school going?" "It's okay," she shrugged. "Nothing special." Veronica went to a prestigious college on the East Coast. I had no idea what she was studying. Our conversations rarely went beyond superficial questions about weather and health. "Verona, honey," Shirley interjected, using her daughter's pet nickname. "Help me with the appetizers." They retreated to the kitchen, leaving me alone among strangers. Norman returned with a glass of whiskey and handed it to me. "Make yourself comfortable," he said. "Dinner will be in half an hour." With these words, he walked away to a group of men discussing something by the fireplace. I took a sip of whiskey and looked around. The living room was tasteful but impersonal, like a page from an interior design magazine. Nothing personalized. Nothing that told me anything about the people who lived here. Even the family photos on the mantelpiece looked like staged shots from an advertisement for happy family life. I noticed that I wasn't in those pictures. Shirley, Norman, Veronica. A perfect family of three, with no hint of the existence of a grandfather or other relatives. This discovery didn't surprise me, but it still prickled. I had been erased from the family history, turned invisible. Perhaps that's why tonight's invitation seemed so suspicious. It seemed out of character with my invisibility. With glass in hand, I walked to the window, looking out at the neatly trimmed lawn and ornamental bushes. It was evening, and in the thickening dusk the house seemed an island of light and warmth, but I felt more alien here than outside. Dinner was served in the dining room, a spacious room with a long dining table that never seemed to be used for ordinary family meals. The white tablecloth, silverware, crystal glasses, everything looked like a set for filming an advertisement for the perfect life. The guests were seated according to name cards placed on the table. I found my place at the far end of the table, almost at the door to the kitchen, a symbolic distance from the center of the event where Shirley and Norman were seated. "Now, Mr. Broom," the middle-aged woman sitting to my right addressed me. "Shirley told me you were a watchmaker?" She said the word watchmaker as if she were talking about something exotic and slightly ridiculous. "I restore antique clocks," I answered, cutting off a piece of steak. "It's a hobby and a small business at the same time." "How interesting," she said, without a trace of interest in her voice. "It must be soothing? More like it requires concentration and patience." I tried to engage her in a real conversation. "Some mechanisms are over 100 years old and each has its own peculiarities." Of course. She was clearly looking for a way to change the subject. "How long have you lived in Winston-Salem?" "All my life." The conversation continued in the same vein, superficial questions and equally superficial answers. I noticed that the other guests were talking animatedly, laughing, sharing stories. Norman was saying something, gesticulating vigorously, and his listeners burst into loud laughter. Shirley sat nearby, elegant and confident, occasionally adding her own comments, which were also met with applause of approval. Veronica sat a few seats away from me, more immersed in her phone than in what was happening at the table. Occasionally, she would look up to laugh at another joke from her father or answer a question from one of the guests, but then return to the screen. The food was exquisite but tasteless to me. I chewed mechanically, drinking wine that in any other situation would have been excellent. Here it seemed to be part of the scenery, expensive to impress, but it did not evoke any emotion. After the main course, dessert was served, some elaborate French cake, the name of which I couldn't hear. Shirley rose from her seat holding a glass of champagne. "Friends," she began with a smile, looking around at the crowd, "thank you for sharing this evening with us. As you know, today is a very special day, my father's birthday. All eyes turned to me, and I felt like an object in a museum, something to be looked at with curiosity but no real interest. Dad's turning 68, Shirley continued, and we wanted to celebrate with some close friends." I looked at my daughter, trying to catch the sincerity in her words, but her speech sounded stilted, as if she'd practiced it in front of a mirror. "Please raise a glass to my father," Shirley raised her glass, "to his health and long life." "Cheers!" The guests joined in, raising their glasses. I nodded and took a sip. I had a strange feeling that there was something insincere in that toast, as if there was another meaning behind it. "And now," Shirley put her glass on the table, "the most exciting moment of the evening, the presents." Norman got up and left the room, returning a minute later with a large box wrapped in brightly colored gift paper. Veronica suddenly perked up, put the phone away, and straightened in her chair as if preparing for something important. "Daddy," Shirley pointed to the seat next to her, "please join us." I got up and walked over to her, feeling the stares of everyone present. A strange tension hung in the air, as if everyone was waiting for some kind of performance. "Before we give you our gift," Shirley said, "why don't you give us yours?" I pulled an envelope from my inside jacket pocket and handed it to her. Shirley took it and, without opening it, handed it to Norman, who put it on the table. "Thank you, Daddy," she said with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "And now our present. We thought long and hard about what to get you and decided this would be the most appropriate." Norman solemnly handed me the box. It was unexpectedly light, almost weightless. I carefully unwrapped the gift paper, feeling the tension building around me. Veronica suddenly rose from her seat and moved closer, holding her phone in front of her, clearly filming what was happening. Removing the paper, I found a plain cardboard box with a lid. Under the stares of everyone present, I opened it. The box was empty. I looked inside, expecting to see something at the bottom, maybe a small object or a note, but there was really nothing there. There was a silence that lasted only a few seconds, but seemed like an eternity to me. And then Shirley and Norman laughed, loudly with a kind of evil mirth. "Surprise!" Shirley exclaimed. "It's the perfect gift for you, Dad." "I don't understand," I said, still staring at the empty box. "It's very simple," Norman smirked. "You and the box are the same thing. There's something on the outside and nothing inside." The laughter grew louder. Shirley and Norman were joined by some of the guests, though I could see the embarrassment and awkwardness on the faces of others. "Empty," Shirley said, looking me straight in the eye. "All your life you've been nothing. For Mom, for me, for everyone." I stood holding the empty box and felt something shatter inside. Not pain. Pain requires surprise. It was more like a confirmation of my worst fears, the final proof of what I'd been guessing all these years. Veronica kept filming, moving around us to capture my reaction from different angles. Her face lit up with excitement, as if she was filming the climactic scene of a movie. "This is going to be a viral video, Grandpa," she said with a smile. "An old man gets an empty box for his birthday. His reaction is priceless." Some guests looked frankly embarrassed. Others tried to hide their awkwardness behind artificial smiles. But no one intervened. No one said it was unacceptable. "You've always been a nobody," Shirley continued, clearly getting the hang of it. "A petty insurance agent who never amounted to anything. Mom deserved better. I deserved better." "Do you know why we invited you here tonight?" Norman asked. Shirley wanted to finally express everything that had accumulated over the years, to close this chapter. I was silent, looking at my daughter and trying to see in her face the little girl I had once cradled in my arms. But in front of me was a strange woman, with cold eyes and a cruel smile. "Don't you have anything to say?" Shirley grinned. "Of course you have nothing to say. You always kept silent when you had to speak, always backed down when you had to fight." I carefully placed the empty box on the table. My hands didn't shake, my voice was calm when I finally spoke. "I accept your gift, Shirley, and thank you for dinner." It was clearly not the reaction they'd hoped for. Shirley frowned, irritation flashing in her eyes. "That's it?" she asked. "Nothing you want to say in your defense?" "Whatever I say, you've already decided who I am," I replied. "You're entitled to your opinion." Veronica looked disappointed. "Come on, Grandpa," she said. "Get angry, cry. Do something interesting for the video." I looked at my granddaughter, her young face contorted with a strange mixture of frustration and excitement. Something clenched inside at the thought of my blood, my flesh and blood, filming my humiliation for the entertainment of strangers. "I'm sorry to disappoint you, Veronica," I said. "You should probably look for more emotional characters for your videos." I turned to the guests, many of whom were now avoiding eye contact with me. "Thank you all for your company. Have a good evening." With these words, I headed for the exit from the dining room. Behind me, I heard Shirley's voice. "You see? It's always like that. He just walks away when the going gets tough. All his life he's done nothing but run away." I didn't stop or turn around. In the hall, I took my coat from the coat rack and walked out of the house, closing the door quietly behind me. The evening air was cool and fresh after the stuffy atmosphere of the house. I inhaled deeply, feeling the oxygen fill my lungs. The first stars were showing in the sky, and the moon hung low over the horizon, large and yellow. I walked slowly to my car parked at the curb. My thoughts were jumbled in my head, my feelings jumbled into an indecipherable ball that I couldn't untangle. Was I in pain? Sure, but the pain was deeper than mere humiliation. It was the pain of realizing the final breakup, a loss that could no longer be recovered. When I got in the car, I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there, looking at the lighted windows of the house, where the party continued. The lights were still on in the dining room and I could make out the silhouettes of people. I wondered what they were talking about now. Were they discussing my humiliation? Or had they already moved on to other topics, forgetting about the old man with the empty box? I remembered Shirley's face as she spoke her cruel words. There was no hatred in it. That would have been more understandable. There was something akin to satisfaction, as if she was carrying out a long-planned plan and was pleased with its successful realization. What had I done to deserve such dislike? Where and when had I erred so badly as a father? After Catherine's death, I did become distant, immersed in work and grief. Maybe Shirley needed me then more than I realized. Maybe she saw my silence and detachment not as grief, but as indifference. But even if so, did that justify tonight's performance? A public humiliation, filmed for the entertainment of the internet public. I started the engine and drove slowly away from the house. On the way home, I was almost oblivious to the world around me. The city floated by the car windows like a blurred picture, leaving no trace in my mind. I parked in front of my house, went inside, and, without turning on the light, walked into the living room. The clock on the wall showed the beginning of 10. I'd only spent a couple hours at my daughter's house, but it felt like a lifetime. Taking off my jacket and tie, I sat down in a chair and closed my eyes. The ticking of the dozens of clocks in the house, usually soothing, now sounded like mockery, each click counting down the seconds of a life spent on illusions and unfulfilled hopes. You and the box are one and the same. There's something on the outside, but inside there's an emptiness. Norman's words echoed in his head over and over again. Was he right? Was my life empty, devoid of real substance? I thought of my hours, of the clients to whom I returned pieces of history, of the quiet evenings with a book, of the rare conversations with Alvin. It was a modest life, but I never considered it empty. But maybe it looked different from the outside. Maybe to people like Shirley and Norman, who valued success, recognition, and material achievement, my life really did seem meaningless. I opened my eyes and looked at the photograph of Catherine standing on the mantelpiece. She was smiling from it, young, beautiful, full of life. That's how I remembered her before her illness. "What would you say, Catherine?" I whispered in the silence. "Would you agree with our daughter?" I knew the answer. Catherine never measured people by their success or status. She saw value in kindness, honesty, the ability to love. And she loved me, not for my accomplishments, but simply for who I was. The doorbell interrupted my musings. I glanced at the clock. It was almost 10 o'clock at night. Who could have come in so late? I got up and walked to the door without turning on the light in the hallway. Through the door glass, I saw Alvin's silhouette. Opening the door, I looked at my friend in silence. He was standing on the doorstep with his hands in the pockets of his old jacket, looking worried. "I saw you arrive an hour ago," he said. "The lights weren't on, so I thought I'd see if everything was all right." I stepped aside, letting him into the house. "Come on in." We walked into the kitchen, where I only turned on the small lamp above the table, creating an island of light in the darkness. I pulled a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses from the cabinet. "Did it go badly?" Alvin asked as I poured him a drink. I nodded, not going into details, but Alvin wouldn't be my friend if he couldn't read between the lines. "What did they do?" he asked, looking me straight in the eye. I took a sip of whiskey, feeling the alcohol burn my throat. "They gave me an empty box," I said finally, "and they said I was just as empty inside." Alvin whined, a rarity for a former teacher who usually watched his speech. "In public, in front of everyone." I nodded. "And my granddaughter filmed the whole thing on her phone. For her social media." Alvin's face darkened with anger. "They had no right," he said. It's just cruel." I shrugged, feeling oddly calm after the shock I'd experienced. "You know what the saddest part is?" I said, looking into the whiskey glass. Part of me still hoped that this could be a real reconciliation, that Shirley really wanted to mend the relationship. Alvin shook his head. "Some people just aren't capable of appreciating what they have until they lose it." "I'm afraid Shirley never thought I had anything of value in me," I replied. We sat in the semi-darkness of the kitchen, drinking whiskey and talking about the past, about children, about disappointments and hopes. Alvin didn't try to comfort me with empty words or tell me things would get better. He was just there, and that was enough. Toward midnight, he left, promising to stop by tomorrow. I was left alone in a quiet house filled with the ticking of clocks, the only witnesses to my lonely life. Before I went to bed, I looked at Catherine's picture again. "I'm not empty," I told her. "They just can't see what's inside." Sunday morning greeted me with a headache, a consequence of last night's whiskey drinking with Alvin. I rarely drank more than one glass, but yesterday we'd emptied almost half the bottle while sitting in the kitchen talking until late at night. I struggled to get out of bed and wandered to the bathroom. My face in the mirror looked gaunt, dark circles under my eyes. The events of last night came back to mind in all their unpleasantness: the empty box, Shirley's cruel words, the laughter of the guests, Veronica's camera pointed at my face in the moment of humiliation. I took a shower, trying to wash away not only the physical fatigue but also the bitterness of the memories. It didn't work. They remained like a thorn in my side. In the kitchen, I brewed a strong cup of coffee and sat by the window, looking out at my small backyard. Spring was in full swing. The first blossoms were blooming on the apple tree Catherine and I had planted years ago. Their soft pink color contrasted with the grayness of my thoughts, the empty box. "You're just as empty and useless." Those words spun around in my head like a broken record. It wasn't that I'd never given much thought to how Shirley felt about me. The years of estrangement spoke for themselves. But I hadn't expected such blatant cruelty, such public humiliation. Why? What had I done to deserve such hatred? Or was it not about what I'd done, but about who I was, or wasn't, to her? The ringing of the doorbell interrupted my gloomy musings. I glanced at the clock. It was about 10 in the morning. Alvin had probably come to check on me, as promised. Opening the door, I did indeed see my neighbor. He looked worried, though he tried to hide it behind his usual grumpiness. "You look like shit," he said instead of greeting me. "I feel accordingly," I replied, letting him inside. "Coffee? I'll have some." We walked into the kitchen where I poured him a cup of coffee. Alvin sat down at the table, took his smartphone out of his pocket and put it down in front of him. "How are you?" he asked, looking at me carefully. I shrugged. "I've been better." "Hunter," Alvin stepped forward. "I need to show you something. But first, I want you to know that what Shirley and her family did wasn't your fault. No one deserves to be treated like that, especially by their own children." His serious tone alerted me. "What's wrong?" Alvin picked up the phone and, after a moment's hesitation, turned it toward me. "Lydia saw it this morning. The video went online last night. On the screen, I saw some social media page I didn't use. The top entry belonged to Veronica Pym, my granddaughter. The headline read, 'Empty box for an empty man. Grandpa is shocked.' Below the headline was a video, the same one Veronica shot yesterday. I saw myself opening the box, the bewilderment on my face, the gloating smiles of Shirley and Norman. I heard their cruel words and the laughter of the guests. But worse than the video were the comments underneath. Dozens, if not hundreds of strangers laughed at my humiliation, added their insults, shared the post further. "The old man's face is priceless. This is how you deal with toxic parents. Grandpa looks like a typical boomer who deserves it. Brilliant. Haven't laughed like that in a long time. There were other comments, condemning this behavior, expressing sympathy for me, the stranger in the video, but they were a minority. I stared at the screen and a cold emptiness spread inside. It's one thing to be humiliated in front of a dozen people, most of whom I will never see again. It's quite another when your humiliation becomes entertainment for thousands of strangers around the world. How many people have already seen this? I asked, struggling to find the words. Alvin picked up his phone and checked the stats. Over 15,000 views, he answered grimly. And the number is growing. The video was starting to spread. I felt the blood drain from my face. 15,000 people, 15,000 strangers watched my daughter and son-in-law publicly humiliate me, and most found it amusing. The world has gone crazy, I muttered, turning away from the window. When did humiliating another person become entertainment? Hunter, Alvin put a hand on my shoulder. We can do something about this. We can try to get the video taken off the net. There are rules against such content. I shook my head. What's the point? If it's already spread, there's no stopping it. Besides, I don't even know how to use these social networks. Lydia does, Alvin said. She works with it every day, and she's very angry about what happened. I looked up. Lydia saw it? Alvin nodded. She came across the video this morning. One of her subscribers shared it. She called me right away. I sighed, feeling tired, which had nothing to do with a sleepless night or the whiskey I'd drunk. What could she do? Remove the video from the internet? Make people forget what they'd already seen? Not exactly. Alvin pulled another phone out of his pocket, his own. She wanted me to tell you that she wants to talk to you. She could come over any time. I hesitated. I didn't want to see anyone. I wanted to cower in a corner and lick my wounds alone. But another part of me knew that wouldn't solve the problem. Okay, I said at last. Let him come. Alvin dialed his daughter's number, spoke to her briefly, and disconnected. She'll be here in 20 minutes. She's coming straight from the newsroom. We sat in silence, finishing our coffee. I felt grateful to Alvin for not trying to comfort me with empty words or useless advice. He was just there, and that was enough. You know, I said after a long silence, I always thought the worst thing was loneliness. Turns out there are worse things. Alvin nodded. Betrayal by loved ones. Nothing hurts worse. 20 minutes later, as promised, Lydia arrived. I heard her car pull up, the door slam. Alvin went to open the door and I stayed in the kitchen feeling strangely numb. Lydia entered with a brisk step, carrying with her the smell of fresh air and some floral scent of perfume. She was an attractive woman in her 36th year tall, slender with short brown hair and the lively brown eyes she had inherited from her father. Mr. Broom, she came over, and to my surprise, hugged me tightly. I'm so sorry this happened to you. I patted her back awkwardly, unaccustomed to such an open display of emotion. Thank you, Lydia. And please, call me Hunter. She pulled away and sat across from me, placing her bag on the table. I saw that disgusting video, she said without preamble. What your daughter and her family did is unforgivable, and the fact that they put it online makes it even worse. I nodded, not knowing what to say. Hunter. Lydia leaned forward, looking me straight in the eye. I can help. I have a platform, I have a voice, and I want to use them to right this injustice. What do you have in mind? I asked, intrigued by her determined tone. Lydia pulled a laptop out of her bag and opened it up. In addition to working at the newspaper, I blog about city life. I have over 50,000 subscribers, not just in Winston-Salem, but all over the country. People listen to what I have to say. She turned the screen toward me, showing a page of her blog. I saw a professionally designed site with photos of the town, articles about local events, and interviews with residents. I can use this video, Lydia continued, but in a completely different context. Not as a funny prank, but as an example of outrageous disrespect for the older generation, as a demonstration of how cruel the internet can be. What's that going to accomplish? I asked, still not sure what she was getting at. It will change the narrative, Lydia explained. Instead of being an object of ridicule, you will become an example of dignity in the face of cruelty, and your daughter and her family. Well, public opinion can be a powerful force. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to just forget all of this, lock myself away in my house and never face the outside world again. But the other part, the part that still retained pride and a sense of justice, was responding to Lydia's suggestion. "Do you want to use the same video?" I asked. "Yes," she nodded. "With your permission, of course. I'm going to write an article about how social media can be a tool for bullying, especially against the elderly. About how easy it is today to turn someone's humiliation into entertainment content, and about how you responded to this situation with dignity." "I'm not sure," I started, but Alvin interrupted me. "Hunter, think about it. These people have publicly humiliated you and put it on display for the whole world to see. They need to realize that such actions have consequences." I looked out the window at the blossoming apple trees in the yard. Catherine loved those flowers. Every spring she would put the branches in a vase on the kitchen table, filling the house with their delicate fragrance. "What would Catherine say?" I asked quietly, more to myself than to my guests. "I didn't know your wife," Lydia replied softly, "but I doubt she would approve of what your daughter did." I sighed, making a decision. "Good. Do what you think is right." Lydia brightened. "Thank you for your trust. I promise I will present the situation in a way that respects you." "What do I need to do?" I asked, feeling unsure in the unfamiliar territory of the internet and social media. "Nothing," Lydia replied confidently. "Just give me permission to use the video and perhaps agree to a short interview so I can convey your point of view." The thought of talking about my feelings for publication made me uncomfortable, but I understood Lydia's logic. My voice was needed for the story to have weight. "Not tonight," I said. "I need some time to gather my thoughts." "Of course," Lydia nodded. "Maybe tomorrow." The sooner we respond to this video, the more effective the response will be. I agreed, and we arranged for her to come in tomorrow afternoon for an interview. When Lydia left, Alvin stayed behind. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite pinpoint, something between pride and concern. "Are you sure you want to go this way?" he asked. "It could lead to an even bigger breakup with Shirley." I grinned bitterly. "A breakup? After last night, I'm not sure there's anything left to break. She made it clear that I was for her." Alvin nodded, accepting my answer. "You know," he said after a pause, "sometimes I envy you." "Jealous?" I looked at him in surprise. "What's there to envy?" "You had Catherine," he said simply. "True love. I'd been married twice, and both times it had been, well, wrong. You had the real thing." I smiled, remembering, yes, it was. But sometimes I think that if Catherine had been alive, things might have turned out differently with Shirley. She's always been the mediator between us. "Maybe," Alvin agreed, "but you can't change the past. You can only decide what to do now." We spent the rest of the day doing the usual things. Alvin helped me with some repairs in the workshop. A shelf that had been wobbling for a long time had finally gotten new mounts. Then we ordered pizza and watched an old Western on TV. Simple, ordinary things that helped take my mind off the heavy thoughts. In the evening, after Alvin left, I sat down at my desk in the workshop. In front of me lay the Howard clock, a complex early 20th century movement that I had promised to restore for the museum. The work required concentration and precision, exactly what I needed right now. Putting on my magnifying glasses, I began to carefully disassemble the mechanism, arranging the parts in a specific order on a clean cloth. Each gear, each spring, each screw had its own place and function. Together, They created a complex system that, when properly adjusted, worked with amazing precision. Clocks, unlike humans, were predictable. If something went wrong, you could always find the cause and fix it. With people, it was more complicated, especially the ones you loved. Every once in a while, I would take a break from work and look out the window, watching the dusk fade. My mind was spinning with thoughts of tomorrow's interview with Lydia, what I would say, how I would explain my feelings. What did I really feel? Pain, of course, disappointment, but strangely also relief, as if the last illusion had dissipated, and now I could see the situation for what it really was. The phone rang, interrupting my musings. I looked at the screen and was surprised to see Shirley's name. My heart skipped a beat. Why was she calling? To apologize, or to add another humiliation? After the fifth ring, I answered, "Yes? Dad." Shirley's voice sounded strained. "We have to talk." "About what?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "About yesterday. Yeah, we didn't expect you to react like that." I gripped the phone tighter. "How do you expect me to react to public humiliation?" "It was just a prank." She sounded defensive. "Everybody does it. It's for the internet." "For the internet," I repeated. "So it's okay to humiliate my dad in front of strangers and put it online if it's for the internet?" "You're dramatizing everything." Shirley sounded annoyed now. "We just wanted to create a funny moment. Veronica is gaining followers. She needed viral content." I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of bitterness rising inside. My humiliation was just a way to gain followers for my granddaughter. "Did it work?" I asked. "Did the video go viral?" "Actually, yes." A note of pride slipped into her voice. "It's already gotten over 20,000 views. But that's not the point. I'm just calling to say, that we didn't mean to offend you. Not an apology," I noted. "Just a statement that they didn't mean what they clearly meant." "I hear you, Shirley," I said calmly. "Is that it?" A pause. "Actually, no." Her voice became more businesslike. "There's something else. Remember when we talked about the house? About how it was getting hard for you to take care of it?" I tensed up. We had actually discussed that a few months ago. Shirley had suggested that I move into a nursing home, or, as she called it, an active retirement community. I declined. "I remember," I said. "I found a great place," she continued enthusiastically. "Sunny Hills. It's only 15 minutes from us. They have a studio apartment available. And best of all, they accept payment through the sale of existing properties. That's it." Everything was starting to make sense now. The birthday invitation, the ostentatious concern, it was all part of the plan to convince me to sell the house and move. "Is that why you invited me to your birthday party?" I asked bluntly. "To discuss selling the house." "What? No, of course not." Shirley sounded indignant, but somehow unconvinced. "That's not the same thing. It's just a coincidence that I found out about this place now." I was silent, and she continued, clearly nervous. "Look, Dad, you can't live alone in that old house forever. It's too big for you. It needs constant upkeep. Sunny Hills will take care of you. There are people there your age." "Shirley," I interrupted her, "I'm not selling the house, and I'm not moving to a nursing home. This is my home, and I'm staying here as long as I can." "But Dad—" "No," my voice was firm. "It's out of the question. If that's all you wanted to talk about, then this conversation is over." The pause dragged on. When Shirley spoke again, her voice was cold. "This is why I can't talk to you properly. You've always been like that. Stubborn, uncooperative, thinking only of yourself." "That's an interesting characterization from a man who publicly humiliated his father for likes on the internet," I replied. "It was a joke," she exclaimed. "God, why do you always have to make everything so complicated?" "Goodbye, Shirley," I said, and disconnected without waiting for an answer. I put the phone down and went back to work on the clock, but my hands were shaking a little, so I decided to take a break. Walking out to the backyard, I sat down on a bench under the apple tree. The night was quiet, with only the distant barking of a dog breaking the stillness. So that's what it was all about. The whole show, the birthday party, the family reunion, it was all just a way to get me to talk about selling the house. And when I didn't react as they expected to their joke, they decided to act directly. Was that the real reason for their cruelty? Or was there a deeper underlying real resentment that had been building up over the years? I didn't know, and frankly, I wasn't sure I wanted to know anymore. One thing was clear. Tomorrow's interview with Lydia was taking on a new meaning. It wasn't just a reaction to a humiliating video. It was an assertion of my right to live my life the way I wanted without pressure and manipulation from those who were supposed to be looking out for me, not my property. I looked up at the starry sky, breathing in the scent of apple blossoms, and felt a strange calm. It was as if the last piece of the puzzle had fallen into place, and now I saw the full picture, unsightly but clear. Tomorrow I'll tell my story, not for revenge, no, for the truth. And let Shirley and her family realize that some actions have consequences, even if they were done for the internet. The interview with Lydia took place on Monday afternoon. She came with her laptop and a small recorder, and we spent about 2 hours talking in my workshop amidst the ticking clock. I told her about my relationship with Shirley, how it had changed since Catherine's death, the gradual estrangement that had only intensified over the years. It was unusual and uncomfortable to talk about personal things, but Lydia knew how to listen, asked questions delicately, and gradually I opened up more than I had planned. I told her about Shirley's call yesterday, about her insistence that I sell the house and move to Sunny Hills. So that's what it was all about, Lydia said thoughtfully. The house, the money. I think it was more than that, I replied. There was something else, some deep-seated resentment that had been building up for years. Lydia nodded. Often there are complex feelings behind such cruelty that people can't or won't express directly. But to use humiliation as a way to achieve your goals, it's unforgivable. When the interview ended, Lydia said she planned to publish the piece tomorrow morning. I will include the video with your permission, she said. But the context will be completely different, not as an amusing prank, but as an example of how easy it is these days to turn someone else's humiliation into entertainment. I agreed, though I was still bothered by the thought of more people seeing my humiliating moment, but perhaps it was a necessary price to pay. Lydia left, promising to send me a link to the publication as soon as it was available. I spent the rest of the day working on Howard's watch, trying not to think about the upcoming article and the possible repercussions. Tuesday morning began as usual, coffee, reading the news on my tablet, checking email. At 9 o'clock came a message from Lydia with a link to her blog. I took a deep breath and clicked on it. The title of the article read, "When Family Humiliation Becomes Entertainment, a Disturbing Trend on Social Media." Underneath it was a photo, a still frame from a video of me holding an empty box, with my face full length so readers would see not an abstract story, but a real person facing abuse. I started reading. Lydia wrote a powerful, emotional, yet reasoned text about how social media has changed the way we view other people's humiliation, turning it into a form of entertainment. She described the situation with the video, without naming names but detailing how the daughter and her family organized the public humiliation of her elderly father for the sake of views and likes. A quote from my interview was woven into the text. When you see your humiliation become entertainment for thousands of strangers, something inside you dies. Not just trust in your loved ones, but your faith in humanity in general. Lydia went on to analyze the comments under the original video, showing how easily the anonymity of the internet turns people into cruel observers of other people's pain. She also mentioned that there were self-serving motives behind the prank, a desire to gain control of an elderly person's property. She ended the article by calling for more empathy on social media and respect for the older generation, whose experience and wisdom is often devalued in today's society. I reached the end, feeling a strange mix of emotions, relief that my story had been told with dignity, and anxiety about what would happen next. Not an hour later, the bell rang. It was Alvin. "Did you see Lydia's article?" he asked without preamble. "Yeah, I just read it. It's going viral," he sounded surprised. "Lydia says it's been read by over 10,000 people in 2 hours and the numbers are growing. I didn't know how to react to that news." "Is that good?" "Depends on what you wanted to accomplish," Alvin replied. "But if the goal was to change the perception of the situation, then yes, it's very good." By lunchtime, the article was everywhere. Lydia called and said it had been picked up by several major news sites specializing in social topics. Veronica's original video began to be flagged en masse as inappropriate content, and the platform's administration eventually removed it. But by then, the story had already spread far beyond a single video. The hashtag #EmptyBox became a trend that symbolized disrespect for the older generation. People shared stories about their parents and grandparents and the importance of family ties and respect. Many told of their own experiences of encountering ageism and cruelty on social media. I tried to stay out of this storm, but information still reached me through Alvin and Lydia. Among other things, they reported that Shirley, Norman, and Veronica had started receiving messages from outraged users. Some recognized them from videos, others through mutual acquaintances. In a small town like Winston-Salem, secrets don't live long. That evening, another call came in, this time from Shirley. I hesitated before answering, but decided it would be cowardly to avoid the conversation. "Yes?" I said, picking up the phone. "What have you done?" Her voice was shaking with rage. "Do you have any idea what's going on?" "Hello, Shirley," I answered calmly. "What are you talking about?" "Don't pretend," she was almost shouting. "This article, all these people writing nasty things to us. Veronica's hysterical. Her account's been blocked. Norman got a call from the office. He's in trouble at work. It's all because of you." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "No, Shirley, this is all because of you. Because of what you did. It was just a joke." There was desperation in her voice. "How could you do that to your own family?" "Family?" I grinned unhappily. "Do you really think we're family after what happened?" Pause. "Did you have to take it public?" Now there was a pitying note in her voice. "We could have worked it out between us." "How?" I asked. "You were the one who took it public first, Shirley. You and Veronica. You made my humiliation public." "That's different," she exclaimed. "No one knew who you were, and now they know who you are," I replied. "It's unpleasant, isn't it?" Shirley took a deep breath, clearly trying to pull herself together. "Listen, Dad, you have to make a statement. Say it was all a misunderstanding, that we've made up. That woman who wrote the article should take it down." "Why?" I asked. "To save your reputation? The reputation of a family that publicly humiliated their own father and grandfather for the sake of likes on the internet." "You don't understand." Her voice was angry again. "We're in serious trouble. People recognize us on the street. Veronica can't leave the house without someone saying something nasty to her. Norman's in danger of getting fired." "I'm sorry about what happened," I said, and it was the truth. Despite everything that had happened, I didn't want to cause them any real harm. "But I won't lie for you. What you did was cruel, and putting it online was even worse." "So, you're not going to do anything?" Her voice turned icy. "You're just going to let it go?" "What would you do if you were me, Shirley?" I asked quietly. "After everything that's happened?" Silence. "It's about the house, isn't it?" she finally said. "Are you getting back at me for suggesting you move?" I shook my head, though she couldn't see it. "No, Shirley. It's not revenge, it's just the truth. The truth about what you did. You're going to regret it." Her voice sounded threatening. "We all will, but you especially." With those words, she disconnected. I put the phone down and sat still for a long time, staring out the window. The clock in the workshop ticked away, counting down the seconds. Shirley's threat didn't scare me. What else could she do after what she'd already done? But her incomprehension, her inability to see her own guilt in what had happened, made me deeply sad. For the next few days, I tried to live a normal life. I worked on watches, met with clients, read books in the evenings. But the story continued to unfold without my involvement. Lydia called regularly with updates. The article resonated widely, starting a discussion about digital ethics and responsibility on social media. Several local TV stations approached her for interviews, but she declined, respecting my desire not to turn the story into an even bigger public spectacle. "But people need to know," she said during one of our conversations. "This is not just a story about one family. It's a story about how we treat each other in the digital age." I understood her point of view, but was grateful for the respect for my comfort. Friday night, Alvin called and invited me over to his house for dinner. "Lydia is making her famous lasagna," he said. "She wants to celebrate the success of the article, and she'd love it if you'd join her." I agreed, feeling that I really needed to get out of the house and spend time in the company of people who genuinely cared about me. Alvin's house was 2 streets away from mine, a small one-story structure similar to mine but with a more manicured garden. Alvin had always been an avid gardener, unlike me. When I got to the door, it swung open before I could even ring the bell. Lydia stood on the doorstep with a wide smile. "Hunter," she hugged me. "I'm so glad you came." The house smelled of garlic, tomato sauce, and fresh baked goods. Alvin met me in the living room, holding out a glass of red wine. "To justice," he said, raising his glass. I smiled and raised mine. "To good friends." Dinner was great. Lydia's lasagna really deserved all the praise Alvin had given it. We talked about all sorts of things: books, the city news, the latest movies we'd seen. No one mentioned an article or a video, and I was grateful for that. After dinner, as we sat in the living room with coffee and dessert, Lydia did return to a topic that was undoubtedly on everyone's mind. "I got a letter from the editor of the New York Times," she said. "They want to publish an extended version of the article in their Sunday supplement." "Congratulations," I said sincerely. "That's a great accomplishment." "They would also like to include an interview with you," she added. "But I said I would ask your opinion first." I hesitated for a moment. Part of me wanted to just close this chapter and move on. But another part realized that the story could help other people facing a similar situation. "I'll think about it," I finally answered. "I can't promise, but I'll think about it." Lydia nodded. "Of course. There's no pressure." Alvin cleared his throat. "Have you seen Shirley or any of her family in the last few days?" I shook my head. "No. She hasn't contacted me since that phone call." "They're going through a tough time," Lydia said. "I heard that Norman could really lose his job. His company cares a lot about its image, and the video, well, it doesn't add to their prestige." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and it was true. Despite everything that had happened, I didn't wish them any real harm. "But they made their choice." "Yes," Lydia agreed. "Every choice has consequences." We continued our conversation, moving on to more pleasant topics. Lydia talked about her plans for the future, how she wanted to develop her blog, perhaps write a book. Alvin talked about his garden, about the new varieties of roses he planned to plant in the spring. It was almost 11 p.m. when I finally got ready to leave. Standing on the doorstep, I thanked them both for the evening. "I needed it," I admitted. "Just to be with people who—" I hesitated, searching for words. "Who see you," Alvin finished for me. "Really see you." I nodded, feeling an unexpected warmth in my chest. "Right. Come back any time," Lydia said, hugging me again. "You're always welcome in our home." Returning home under the starry sky, I felt a strange calmness. Yes, a lot of painful things had happened. Yes, my relationship with Shirley will probably never be repaired. But I had found something new, a true friendship, a genuine concern, a sense of self-worth that could not be stolen by any humiliation. At home, there was a message waiting for me on my answering machine. Shirley's voice, tired and tense. "Dad, it's me. We need to talk. Please call me back. It's important." I stood listening as her voice faded, replaced by the mechanical beeping of the end of the message. Then I erased it, feeling neither schadenfreude nor regret, just the certainty that some bridges cannot and should not be rebuilt. In the morning, I called Lydia and told her I'd agreed to an interview for the New York Times, not for revenge, not for fame, but to tell the truth, for the sake that maybe someone reading this story would think twice before turning someone else's pain into entertainment. Another week later, I received an email from a strange woman in Philadelphia. She wrote that she'd seen Lydia's article and it had made her rethink her relationship with her own father, whom she hadn't spoken to in years. They met for the first time in a decade, and it was the beginning of a new understanding between them. "Sometimes it takes an outsider's perspective to see what really matters," she wrote. "Thank you for sharing your story. It changed my life." I folded the letter and put it in my desk drawer. Maybe it wasn't all for nothing. Maybe out of the pain and humiliation something good could be born. Not for me and Shirley, but for someone else. That evening I sat in the backyard, watching the sunset. The apple tree that Catherine and I had planted years ago cast a long shadow over the grass. The flowers had already begun to fall, but soon the first fruits would appear. That's the way it always is in life, I thought. Something ends, something begins. It is only important to maintain dignity along the way and appreciate those who truly see you. Not an empty box, but a person with history, experience, and heart.